2025 was one of the most disruptive years the international development job market has seen in modern history. The sudden decision to cut much of the USAID budget led to immediate layoffs across USAID, followed by US-based INGOs, private implementers, and ultimately even the United Nations itself, where the Secretary General outlined plans to eliminate 20% of positions across the entire UN Secretariat. And here's what struck me most about it. A lot of people didn't see it coming, not because they weren't talented or dedicated, but because they had built careers around skills and systems that assumed the sector would stay the way it was. And it won't. So this video isn't about what looks good on a CV. It's about what actually makes you effective, adaptable, and harder to replace in a sector that's contracting, digitalizing, and fundamentally restructuring, all at the same time. Now here's the story most development professionals tell about building a career. You specialize, you go deep in a technical area, gender, education, M&E, humanitarian response. You get a master's, you add certifications, you learn the dominant frameworks of your sector, and you get very good at executing within them. The implicit promise is deeper technical expertise equals greater value. Stay in your lane, build mastery, and you'll be fine. It's a reasonable story for a stable sector, but international development is no longer a stable sector. AI is already absorbing much of the work that used to go to entry-level hires. Localization is accelerating, with organizations actively shifting toward local talent, not just in execution roles, but in strategic ones. Budget cuts and hiring freezes are shrinking the traditional entry points that the sector relied on for decades. What this means is that the skill calculus has changed. Narrow technical depth built on top of a fragile institutional architecture is not a career strategy, it's a liability now. The practitioners who will navigate what's coming are not necessarily the ones who specialized. They're the ones who can think across systems, the ones who can learn across context, and remain genuinely human in the ways that matter, ways that are becoming more transparent as AI clarifies exactly what it cannot do. Now let's look at what the evidence actually shows across 3 dimensions. First, the sector is explicitly asking for a very different kind of professional. According to Devex reporting from early 2026, AI skills are increasingly becoming an expectation in development hiring, even when AI isn't in the job title. But what organizations want isn't just tool proficiency. They want practitioners who bring curiosity, judgment, and leadership to AI use, who can validate outputs, curate what matters, and apply human discernment that automation cannot supply. The shift happening across development roles is from execution to orchestration, from doing tasks to designing better systems, questioning outputs, and knowing when the tool is wrong. Second, the WEF Future of Jobs report in 2025 tells us which skills are growing fastest globally. Analytical thinking tops the list. Close behind it, resilience and adaptability, creative thinking, leadership and social influence, and motivation and self-awareness. Looking ahead for 2023, the fastest growing skills combine technical capability with distinctly human strengths. We're talking about AI and data literacy alongside systems thinking, curiosity, lifelong learning, and the capacity to lead across difference. What the report makes explicit is that the most in-demand profiles are not purely technical. They're hybrid, people who can work with the tools and who bring something the tools cannot replicate. Third, localization is reshaping who is valued and why. The localization agenda is taking root in practice. Development finance institutions and impact-focused organizations are no longer limiting local professionals to implementation roles. Local knowledge, factual knowledge, cultural understanding, the unwritten rules of how systems actually operate is increasingly recognized as genuine, strategic asset The practitioner who deeply understands the political and social terrain of the context they're working in has an advantage that no external consultant can easily replicate, and that advantage is growing. Now here's the tension worth naming. The sector is asking for more AI literacy, more adaptive capacity, more systems thinking, more contextual understanding, more data skills. The professional development literature gives us longer and longer competency lists. And at the same time, the sector is cutting budgets, shrinking teams, and expecting fewer people to carry more. So the advice you most often hear is upskill in everything, specialize in something, become T-shaped, lands in a context where people are already stretched, and adding another certification doesn't answer the deeper question: what kind of thinker do I need to become? Pascal Burnett, in his book Irreplaceable, reframes this directly. His argument is that the skills that will make you genuinely hard to replace are not primarily technical. He calls them humics: genuine creativity, critical thinking, and social authenticity, all rooted in human experience, in emotion, and relationships. These are qualities AI cannot replicate, and developing them requires more than individual effort. It requires combining human judgment with AI capabilities so that the partnership elevates the human rather than substituting them. But here's what makes this most relevant to development specifically. The sector already holds the values that point toward these qualities. The problem isn't knowing what matters, it's that the institutional architecture, the log frames, the output targets, the upward accountability systems systematically undervalues exactly the capabilities that are now most needed. Now, here's how I read this. Development is entering a period where the skills that protected careers in the past, we're talking about technical skills, institutional fluency, process management, are becoming table stakes at best and automatable at worst. What's becoming genuinely scarce is the capacity to hold complexity, learn from it, communicate across it, and act within it with ethical clarity. One expert in development communications put it this way: the question of can I with AI is increasingly answered. The question of should I is the one we need to constantly interrogate. That question, the ethical, contextual judgment question, is one AI cannot answer. It is a deeply human competency. And it is exactly what the sector's most persistent failures have been missing: the accountability gaps. The misaligned designs, the political decisions repackaged as technical solutions. These are not failures of data, they're failures of judgment, of the willingness to name what's true and act on it, even when the incentives point the other way. The 5 skills this video is naming are not a checklist, they're a framework for becoming the kind of practitioner who can operate effectively inside a complex, resource-limited, digitally transformed sector without losing the ethical clarity that makes this work worth doing at all. Alright, so here's the reframe. The question isn't what skills should I add, it's what kind of professional am I building myself to become. Burnett argues we should stop trying to predict the exact skills the future will demand, and instead focus on strengthening the conditions in our lives and practice where new skills can develop freely. The capacity for growth matters more than any fixed list of competencies. In development terms, that means cultivating systems thinking, not to fill a role, but because the problems we work on are systemic and won't yield to linear logic. It means building your ability to translate data into meaning, not just to produce a report, but because the sector's accountability crisis is partly a communication crisis. It means deepening contextual knowledge because in an era of localization, the practitioner who genuinely understands the political and cultural terrain has a growing and real advantage. And it means staying genuinely human in the work, curious, ethically grounded, willing to learn out loud, willing to name what isn't working, and willing to push back on actions that could be harmful. That combination, technical competency and human depth, is the profile the evidence consistently identifies as most needed and most underproduced. Now, here are the 5 skills, grounded in what the evidence shows, what the sector is asking for, and what AI generally cannot replace. Skill 1, systems thinking. We just mentioned this. Development problems are systemic. Poverty, fragility, gender inequality, climate change. None of these respond to linear interventions. Adaptive management, which is grounded in systems thinking, starts from recognition that solutions to complex problems cannot be fully identified at the outset. They emerge through implementation, monitoring, and honest learning. A practitioner who can map feedback loops, identify leverage points, and understand how change actually moves through a community or institution is operating at a level that no output tracking tool can match. To build this skill, practice asking, why does this system produce this outcome rather than how do we fix this problem? Study complexity thinking in development. Use causal loop diagrams in your program designs. Treat every log frame as a hypothesis, not a plan. Skill number 2, adaptive learning. For male professionals in particular, and for everyone in program roles really, success increasingly requires creating feedback mechanisms that allow teams to learn and adapt in real time. Adaptive learning means treating a project not as a plan to execute, but as a hypothesis to test. Building in decision triggers, documenting what changes and why, communicating honestly about what didn't work. This is the skill that directly addresses the sector's deepest structural failure, a culture that performs learning without practicing it. To build it, you can propose a learning budget in your next project design, or you can write an after-action review that name failure honestly. You can use most significant change methodology to surface community-defined progress and make every debrief a genuine question, not a reporting exercise. Skill 3, data and storytelling together. Data alone doesn't change decisions in development. A well-constructed story guides its audience through the reasoning behind the data, beginning with a question, exploring evidence transparently, and ending with a clear interpretation. The most effective practitioner in a resource-limited, donor-scrutinized environment are the ones who can translate what numbers mean, for whom, and why it matters, in language that reaches a funder, a policymaker, and a community member. As AI takes on more content production, the practitioners who preserve nuance, context, and authentic voice are becoming the quality controllers of what gets communicated, not just the producers. To build it, you can practice writing a one-page impact story from a dataset. You can take a free data visualization course or study how the best development communicators frame evidence for different audiences. Then write the same story for 3 different readers and notice what changes. Skill 4, contextual and political intelligence. Local knowledge, which is factual knowledge, cultural understanding, the unwritten rules of how systems actually function, increases the effectiveness of development programs in ways that are increasingly recognized and documented. As localization accelerates, the practitioner who genuinely understands the political economy of their context, who has power, whose interests are served, what the informal rules are, is growing in value. This is not a skill you acquire from training. It comes from proximity, from relationships, and sustained observation over time. To build it, you can invest in deep context knowledge even when the role doesn't require it. Read the political economy analysis that donors commission and rarely share. You can build genuine relationships with local civil society. Ask who benefits from every design decision you make, and treat that question as a professional discipline, not an afterthought. And finally, skill number 5, creativity, critical thinking, and ethical reasoning all together. Burnett calls for practitioners to be genuinely human-ready, focused on strengthening the empathy, critical thinking, and creativity that makes people indispensable in roles where AI falls short. In development specifically, these aren't abstract qualities. Critical thinking means being willing to ask whether the program you're implementing is actually working for the people it's supposed to serve, and saying so when the evidence suggests it isn't. Ethical reasoning means naming the political when the system wants you to call it technical. Creativity means designing solutions that emerge from genuine community engagement rather than template replication. To build it, you can read outside your sector. Philosophy, behavioral economics, design thinking, anthropology. Apply ethical reasoning to your own organization's decision, not just to fieldwork dilemmas. Cultivate genuine curiosity by spending time with communities, not just with their data. And here's the field question. Of these 5 skills we just talked about, which one is most underdeveloped in your own practice right now? And what would it look like to invest in it over the next 90 days? Don't just answer it, write it down. A skill you can't name specifically enough to act on it is a skill you're not actually building. Now let's bring it all together. The development sector is contracting, restructuring, and digitalizing simultaneously. The skills that define career success in the old architecture, deep technical skills within stable institutions, are under pressure from multiple directions at once. What is emerging as genuinely scarce and genuinely valuable is a different profile entirely. Systems thinking, adaptive learning, data plus storytelling, contextual and political intelligence, and the deeply human capacities like creativity, critical thinking, ethical reasoning that AI cannot replicate and that the sector's persistent failures have consistently lacked. The WEF is unambiguous. The fastest growing skills by 2030 combine technical capability with distinctly human strengths: analytical thinking, creative thinking, system thinking, curiosity, and the ability to lead and influence across difference. Burnett's framework is the insight that the goal is not to predict which specific skills the future will demand. It's to strengthen the conditions in your practice where new skills can develop freely. The capacity for continuous learning matters more than any fixed competency list. That's not really a comfortable prescription in a sector that rewards certainty, but it's the honest one. The Learning Loop Guide linked below is built precisely for this kind of ongoing, structured self-inquiry, because in a sector changing this fast, learning how to learn is not a soft skill. It's the most durable and valuable one you can build. If one of these 5 skills landed differently than the others, I'd love to know which one and why. Drop it in the comments. This is Beyond Social Science, where we focus on practical learning for global change makers. If you learned something new today, I'll see you in the next video.